Hey folks, George Leoniak here, back with new geometry. And once again, I'm super excited to be here with the new video. A couple announcements before we jump into it. On my channel, I have a section called New Conversations. And recently I was on a podcast with Scott Onstott and Jeff Fitzpatrick. And they did an interview with me on their podcast called Geometer's Compass. So they've got a couple more podcast episodes up there. Check those out. They have a online website, Sacred Geometry Academy. So I was thrilled to be on there. Great conversation. I don't know, about 40 minutes or so. Kind of gets into a little bit more about my process and, you know, the cool discoveries that I'm sharing with all of you. And yeah, so that's one announcement. And the other announcement is pretty soon probably have Frank Chester on here. So keep an eye out for that. Looking forward to a conversation with him. I've done at least 6 or so videos on the Chestahedron, so I think his might be the 7th coming up, which is great because of his 7-sided form. So today, I got just a little bit on the Chestahedron, not a lot, but it really led me to a whole new place in my research on sacred geometry. And we're getting into a little bit on Penrose tiles kind of in the beginning, and that led to quasi-crystals. So we're going to look at quasi-crystals and look at how the flower of life and different patterns that we're familiar with, like how do quasi-crystals fit into that. So I'm going to describe what the quasi-crystals are and the awesome discoveries, because they're quite a new find within geometry and within materials and structure of the universe, not really until 1982 or so. So it is very revolutionary. And I believe that it is going to inform sacred geometry. And some of the things I'll be sharing with here are meant to kind of help upgrade our sacred geometric language in relationship to a lot of these new findings we're discovering. So yes, so join me for this one. I got a lot of props around here. So I've got a lot of things to show you. I've got all sorts of sweet little builds that I'm going to deconstruct for you through the slides. You know, I've got bigger ones here. And one thing in my last video that I think is important to discuss, because I forgot I had this little prop with me, which I thought was awesome. In my last video, I started talking about the rhombus shape. And I related it to, you know, a kind of stretched out square. And, you know, I did a lot of research on these rhombohedrons, they're called. You know, because I said the square is the cube is a very unstable structure. You can see it really wants to wiggle around when it doesn't have those supports. But if you just lifted up the cube like this and spread it out into this arrangement here, well, this is the type of form that we're going to be dealing with a lot today. We're going to be dealing with the golden rhombus quite a bit in a little bit in both of its forms, which we can construct our stretched out cube to make both those rhombohedron type of shapes. So these actually fit into the sacred geometry patterns, and I'm going to show you how we can work with these new patterns that are at least emerging for me and how they relate to sacred geometry. Okay, so that was a little bit of a long intro. I got the slideshow set up, so let's jump into that. And, you know, as usual, I kind of like to take you on a little bit of a journey of like how I got here, what was the sequence that I went on, a little bit of the process. I'm going to get into really taking a look at the Rhombic Triacontahedron and really taking that part in the quasi-crystals. That's coming in a little bit, but I got to work up to that and just show you how the Penrose tiles came about. So in my previous slideshow, I was working with the Chestahedron, and I created what I was calling the star Chestahedron, which created that rhombic face. And that rhombic face was in a drawing that I called As Above, So Below. I didn't realize it was there till, you know, a couple months after doing this drawing, because it was constructing these double pentagons. Now, this double phi relationship circle, I'll be talking about this probably from here on out, because I think it's that important to many of the drawings that we do. This blue circle's in phi relationship to the red. So I did a double vesica like that, and it perfectly created these double pentagons. So I did a video on that, teaching people how, you know, the viewers how to draw that. And, you know, I wasn't really paying attention to the angles all that much, but now after calculating all the angles, I realized that they were 108 degrees here. and 72 over here. And it was constructed out of these two pentagons from that first image I showed you there, the as above, so below. That then gave me what I didn't realize at the time, but a portion of a Penrose tile pattern. And the Penrose tile pattern is a kind of aperiodic pattern that will go on infinitely in space, but never actually repeat. That's why it's aperiodic. And most of the drawings that we do in sacred geometry, let's just say we work with the flower of life, for instance, are all periodic. That hexagon structure will just go on and on and on and on and reproduce continuously. And this is going to relate to crystals, because crystallography is very much related to, you know, different hexagonal lattices, square lattices that always are periodic. And the quasi-crystals turn that up on its head very recently, which we'll get to. So, you know, I'm kind of breezing through these slides, but I wanted to show that in this drawing here, both of those Penrose tiles were in this to create that first pattern. This is the long, narrow one you need, and here's the large, long one. It was contained within this drawing. So I guess I'm really just pointing out that the sacred geometry contains all these forms, and it came through this double phi relationship circle for me. And I'll show you how I drew the kite. So Penrose came up with a few different variations. One was with these different rhombic shapes, you know, a little narrower one with the 144-degree angle here. And now this pattern, like I said, will go on infinitely and never repeat. It looks like it might. Locally, you could find little repeating patterns and things like that, but it will always have a variation to it with some sort of like long range kind of coordination that's going on within it. Now, there was another tile that one was really fascinating to me, was the kite and dart. This is the kite shape, and this is the dart shape. And essentially that is that rhombic shape. That's with the 72-degree angle and 108-degree angle here. And then it just has this little raised section right here to create the kite and the dart, you know, 144 to 216 on those two angles. Now, there is kind of a, when you lay out those tiles, there is some sort of rules that go with it. I constructed, you know, cut out my template here that I made and started to construct it. And, you know, it's not really super intuitive. Like, you can run into trouble a lot in this pattern. When you start to do it, all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, that tile's not going to fit. And you have to go back and start redesigning it, until I realized that you can either create rules for the placement of tiles based on the different color points, you know, the white and the black points here on either the kite and the dart, or these semicircles, which will kind of link together. And I got an image of that kind of create these contiguous little wave patterns throughout the whole pattern that will keep you kind of on track. So you're going, always placing tiles correctly. So it's not like you could just start laying it out and tiling a floor like that so easily. Now, that's one important thing about the tiling pattern of a floor, is that the pentagon shape, or let's just back up here, this five-fold symmetry, right? It's created based on 5. Now, that is kind of like a forbidden tile pattern. It was forbidden as a crystalline structure, because when you start laying out pentagons on a floor together, or star points on a floor together, all of a sudden you're going to start to get these gaps, which then broke up the pattern. So it wasn't until Penrose, around 1976, a famous Nobel Prize winning physicist, created this pattern that created the pentagon shaped patterns, but also had these smaller shapes, which were still based on golden ratio proportions, that would create this pattern. So it was kind of a structure that, you know, we weren't able to tile floors or patterns like that before he discovered that, which is quite recent. So even the quasi-crystals that come out of that are also quite recent. I just wanted to show within this drawing, before I continue to move on, that this is how I discovered in my first template, the as above, so below, that everything you need to create those tiles that you see on the right here is contained within that drawing. And that's just really fascinating to me, because I didn't really see a construction method. You know, most people probably just have a computer program that lays it out, and you set the angles or whatever, and you draw the tiles. but I love to kind of like backwards program, work on the computer a little bit and then figure out how do we actually make sure we can draw this? Because then it really feels like it can integrate into someone's design pattern just with the compass and a straight edge. So with the as above, the double phi circles, you lay out that big rhombus, and then you create these kite shapes, or this is how the Chestahedron was playing in it, the star Chestahedron. See, those kite faces were part of the Chestahedron. Well, they gave the location for where I'm going to draw just this line here. I did it on the bottom there just to do some mirror symmetry. But for the most part, all you need to do is just go along here until it meets that section where the lines cross. And of course, all these lines are like divided into phi relationships. So, I go across and then there's the kite shape and there's the dart on top. And then I could even figure out how to draw in the circles based on everything that was contained within this drawing. So that's just really exciting to me, and just love to see how sacred geometry still becomes foundational to the process of discovering these, that we can do it all with the straight edge and compass. Now, here's the up close pattern. I didn't do this pattern, but I just went to Wikipedia and pulled off this design just to show you close up of what those little squiggles look like as you're linking the kite shapes here with the green dart shapes. You never put them back together the way that you first cut them out, let's say. They're never rearranged that way. You're always nesting them together so that they don't meet in that same pattern. And you can use the guide of the circles that were on each of those tiles. See here, this one is on this tile, it connects to that tile, goes around. And just to show you kind of like how expansive this really is here, let's just kind of zoom out a little bit to just continue to show that the pattern will continue to repeat kind of infinitely. And it is kind of mind-boggling because I'll go out to like 10%. That's the maximum extent I can do on here. And it just goes on and on and on and on. And you would think that if you really searched around on here, you might find, oh, it's repeating. But the truth of it is that it's a periodic pattern that has been tested, by other people who could probably put it in the computer program that will repeat forever infinitely without repeating the same pattern, even though it looks like you're going to find local patterns that look like they are. So that was just really fascinating. There was a video on this. I think it's called The Infinite Pattern That Never Repeats. It's about a 20-minute video. I forget the name of the site, but if you just type that into YouTube, you can come and check that out. And it goes through some of the things and even talks about the quasi-crystals. I watched that about a month ago, saying to myself, you know what, I'll probably never get into quasi-crystals or, Penrose tiles or any of that stuff. Well, here I am, and that Chestahedron brought me back into that. So yeah, check that one out. I think it's a very well done video. So, Penrose created this, and there was no example in nature of any type of pattern that had this going on until the discovery of quasi-crystals in 1982. So that's, only 6 years after the discovery of the Penrose tiles. So it's amazing how things just kind of build off of each other. I'm going to show you a couple different examples of quasi-crystals, because the first one was just in a laboratory. And they thought at first that Daniel Shechtman, who is one of the real spearheads of this, he's the one who first discovered it, was completely baffled by this tenfold symmetry, because he was working with crystal structures, and most of them have 2, 3, 4, and 6 type of lattices that go on within the crystal structure. So all of a sudden he was looking at this diffraction here, and he saw tenfold symmetry, and he was just kind of like, tenfold symmetry? Wait a second, He was actually, kind of ridiculed by his colleagues. He was kind of didn't put this information out for a couple of years, and when he did, he took the brunt of people telling him, go back and read your textbook again on crystallography. It's got to be twinning, and it can't be this. And he really took a lot of heat for this. And I can understand why, because it's radically changing the textbooks. I mean, the textbooks for crystallography had to be rewritten to incorporate quasi-crystals. Now, it was one thing thinking that they were just found in the lab out of different kind of aluminum magnesium compounds kind of that we were creating. And then they did find, the first one I believe was found in nature was actually from the nuclear explosion back in the testing, back in like the 1940s at the Trinity site. The force and temperature and the pressure was just so strong within that it melted the glass and the aluminum that was in the casing of the atomic bomb, that it fused into this crystalline structure, this trinitite it was called, and that was quasi-crystal, had shown up in that explosion there. So it was still a kind of anthropogenic, man-made structure at that point, until they found it actually in nature, not human created. And that wasn't until, 2000, maybe 8 or something like that, 2012. There was a sequence of events. I'm getting my dates maybe mixed up because there was a few I read. But I mean, we're talking within 20 years that we never even knew quasi-crystals, it really existed. Even though we had the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, which these quasi-crystals are built on, this icosahedral symmetry, which was a forbidden structure to have in crystallography. Now, I've got to do a whole other video on this, because the pyritohedral dodecahedron, I always thought was a regular dodecahedron because of how sacred geometry presents it. But all the crystals that we see are actually built off of the cubic octahedral structures, which don't actually create regular pentagon structures. Okay, so I'm going to do another video on the side, but this is now that same, very similar to the Penrose tiling on a flat plane, and we're looking at the first discovery that was in a Russian meteorite. So this was found in nature, and it was a meteorite that is 4.5 billion years old, that it was a fragment of it on Earth that contained the quasi-crystal structure. So that really then put it into, validated all of Sheckman's work, that it wasn't just an anthropogenic thing. I mean, his work was already being accepted by that point, but it's just like we're finding that more. So my question is like, how does that relate to sacred geometry? And the sacred geometry, for the most part, a lot of it, when you're working with the flower of life, is working with that crystalline hexagonal structure endlessly. As I've been pointing out in my videos, it doesn't contain the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. So as we go on in this video, I'm going to show that that system really needs to be updated with phi relationships to get the quasi-crystal, to get this this other aperiodic. Well, we're still not going to be working with a periodic repeating process what I'm about to show you in the flower of life, but it's going to incorporate phi in there. So one thing that was really exciting to me with this is that in a little excerpt from, I guess, Daniel Sheckman, he wrote a thing for inspire kids in science, to follow up on research and how to do things. So it looked like it was written for younger people, and he's telling a story. I read through the whole thing. And in there he says, oh yeah, and look at these relationship of these three circles. Well, they're related to the Mona Lisa. I'll tell you at the end of the article. And right away, I was like, wait a second, those three circles, they've got to be in phi proportion, just like I have been talking about this double phi proportion circles for a little while. In fact, I just took my drawing that I've shown, overlaid over top of an apple. I've put this, I'm doing it with all the flower of life patterns. I'm continually putting these three relationship phi circles inside. And of course, they're the same three circles that are in phi relationship within that quasi-crystal structure. So that was really fascinating to me. Here it is on the apple. If you cut an apple, transverse cut through the apple, when I did that, what I discovered was that there were actually 10 dots around the outer star of the apple. And cut an apple in half, you'll see 10 little dots that are around there, creating a pattern very similar to this decagon symmetry of this quasi-crystal, which just is very cool to see that, that pattern this is not a quasi-crystal, this is an apple, but it shows up in nature, just the decagon symmetry right here. So now one thing we're going to get into here is, they're still kind of working with these and growing these crystals, and they have really a lot of applications to like non-stick surfaces like super strong steel metalwork, very smooth surfaces for aerodynamics. So it seems like quasi-crystals are really going to become a lot of the new technology is going to incorporate them in new ways, especially with like thermodynamics and heat and electricity and conduction and things like that. I'm not really too versed in all that, but I know that it is cutting edge field to work with these. So I came across this one with this binary icosahedral structure. And what this is here is actually a cluster of rhombic triacontahedrons all clustered together in a column here, kind of interlocked and all woven together. And of course, now they're showing what this looks like with the X-ray diffraction through here. And you can see the decagon. And then they show this other view, what's starting to have some sort of hexagonal structure. They said it was from a different view. So that got me really kind of curious, because I know based on my new findings that I'm able to draw this accurately in the flower of life with my phi circles in the flower of life, which we're going to get to in a moment. A couple other things just to follow up on, and I don't really spend a lot of time talking about the 5D or 6D or 4D structures. I did show how to draw a four-dimensional hypercube in one of my videos. They're super interesting and how they expand our perception beyond third dimension for sure. But it looks like these Penrose tilings and the rhombic tricontahedron, when viewed from a certain angle, carries a lot of the six-dimensional hypercube lattice within it, okay? So I'm not going to get into that too much. It's more just like pointing to, check this out if you're a little bit more interested in the quasi-crystal 5D or greater connection. So I'm going to kind of stick with a little bit of 3D because I got a bunch of models and it's impossible for me to show you 5D or 6D structures. So I came across this article that I was really excited about because it was called, let's see, nested tricontahedron contahedral shells, or how to grow a quasi-crystal. So I looked through this article and found that, he showed a like a little method with little building blocks of how to grow a quasi-crystal. Now, I don't know if it's exactly how quasi-crystals grow, but they were talking about quasi-crystals in the article, and how these Rhombohedron, which are based on the golden ratio, are included. So I saw the little building and I made the little model. I'm going to walk you through that in just a moment. Before we do that, I just want to say, well, this is what we're going to be looking at for the majority of the rest of the slideshow. This is the rhombic tricontahedron, and it is, I could show you in this ball of wax. That's what it's called, WHACKS, ball of wax. And it's it's got 30 faces on it and 32 vertices on it. And it's made up of underlying, there's a golden rhombus face, and those golden rhombuses are golden because they have a length this way, let's just say of 1 inch, and this length would be 0.618. So that makes this a golden rhombus. And, this gets back to kind of working with Frank's, like when I came up with this form, I started researching rhombohedrons and came up with the golden rhombus. This wasn't the golden rhombus because this is more about the angles and not the face. Now, in my other video, this face is square root of phi, which I found would be totally awesome when this is based on the square root of 3. So anyway, that's just a little bit of the math. I don't want to get lost in that, but this is the rhombic tricontahedron. I'm going to back out of the slides in a minute to show you some of these things up close. But I just wanted to say that this double circle that you see here, this red and blue one, are the method that I use, which are the phi relationship circles, to draw the rhombic tricontahedron accurately, because you're not able to do it in the perfect hexagonal structure of the flower of life pattern, which we're so familiar with. And I'm going to continue to talk about that a little bit at the end. I not only use that double phi circle that you see here for that view, this is the hexagon view. I use it within the square view, let's just say, or the fourfold symmetry. And I also, of course, definitely use it in the pentagonal symmetry here. So this is looking down at the vertex, and this is what the Penrose tiles are more based on. So we're going to take it and we're going to orient it all towards the flower of life view. Now, here is the model. This is the exciting part. This took a little while to produce this next series of slides. So I've been kind of speeding up the first half of the presentation to get to this. So hopefully you're still with me, because I just find this totally fascinating. And it includes these acute and obtuse golden Rhombohedra, okay? And these golden Rhombohedra, before we jump into this, like we're gonna take 20 of these golden Rhombohedra, and they're of two varieties that they're made of. So we're going to take both varieties and we're going to construct the rhombic tricontahedron out of those shapes, these 20 little pieces, in kind of like a jigsaw-like puzzle, highly ordered, has a rotational symmetry to it that can either be left or right handed. It can go to the left or it can go to the right in how you build it. And the most amazing thing that I think that part of this, besides that is that we're able to do that, is also I'm going to show you how it fits into this seed of life pattern that has 1, 2, 3, 5 relationship circles and a series of other circles around it that also maintain the phi relationship between the red and the blue. Now, I think this pattern is so fascinating and so such an upgrade to our seed of life pattern, because we're going to do something that the original flower of life wouldn't never be able to do because of those phi relationship circles. I'm going to show you every single little piece of this golden Rhombohedra, how it's drawn in this pattern, one for one, in a 2D format of this, okay? So stick with me on that. Let me just pop out real quick just so I can show you a little bit of three-dimensionality for a moment, and then we're going to get back and I'm going to go through those slides. So here, all right, I made some Zoom tools here, and these are the two Rhombohedra, okay? They look totally different, but each of these are the golden rhombic faces, right? So the rhombic face, just like I was saying before, phi relationship along this cross that's formed in the center. So this one is the acute one, right? It's more like the diamond shape that we're familiar with this form, but the angles are not the same. So, these can also be, and I've got something else I'm going to show in the slides in a minute. Let's talk about the obtuse one. I mean, look at this obtuse one. I made all these out of these little, this is all composed, but they got the Velcro connecting all this together. And that little obtuse one is right here at the top. That's just one example of it. And I'm just, Velcroing this little thing together based on these shapes. But this is another rhombic form. And I didn't really know it at the time. Like, it took me till this morning to figure this out. But, a while ago, I just got lucky with the Zoom tools for some reason. I bought a pack of Zoom tools and they gave me this with it for free. I didn't even order it, the 4D cube. So I built this little 4D cube and I had it sitting, on my shelf for quite a while. A smaller version, this is a larger one. And I was looking at it, I was like, okay, yeah, I could see the 4D cube. I could see the cubes that it makes up and all that stuff. But I was like, I don't really know what this is. I was like, oh, that looks like the shape of the rhombic tricontahedron. I wonder if I could build those into a rhombic tricontahedron. I never did it until today. Just this morning I woke up, but I discovered that this is actually a rhombic dodecahedron. It's got 12 faces of these rhombic faces, and it actually has a name called the Belinsky dodecahedron. So the Belinsky dodecahedron is a thing, and this is a zonohedron, which means it will fill space, just like the regular rhombic dodecahedron, with all these rhombic faces connecting together. And it took me that long to catch up to speed of what I really had in my hand till this morning, because they didn't call it Belinsky dodecahedron in here. You just got to make these connections quite slowly. But this morning I decided to make the dodecahedron, the rhombic dodecahedron, the Belinsky one. And all this is now the rhombic tricontahedron, and it's got all this inner lattice that's going on inside it, completely out of those 20 forms that I'm about to show you. So you can make it out of Zoom tools. If you have the Zoom tools, check it out. These blue ones, I'm going to describe what that is in just a little bit, why I have the blue ones running through it. But for now, don't worry about them. Just realize that that little 4D cube that sent in that little pack is the structure that's woven throughout that. And I didn't realize it till I made all these little cutout parts for this here that I can pull off into those little tiny shapes, right? So, and okay, let's get back to the share now, because I set up the sequence of slides that took a little while. I've got photographs of everything. I've got you're going to follow along on the side here so I can show you kind of piece for piece how we're going to construct this kind of from the ground up. And it's kind of like there's only a couple places I've seen this on the web, so it's not like I'm discovering this, but it totally is radical to me of how it brings in the quasi-crystal. So this is from that article, How to Grow a Quasi-Crystal with these rhombic with these rhombic rhombohedrons. So the first thing you're looking at here, in all these slides, I'm putting out the next 3 that are going to be connected to it. So they're not in the drawing yet. But what we do have is this flattened, it looks like a cube. This is why with this shape here, we don't know what we're looking at. That's what I'm going to keep saying. Like, it could be a chestahedron right now. It could be this. I've showed you in my previous video how we could be looking at chestahedrons in that way, or this rhombic chestahedron. It could be a rhombic dodecahedron. It could be this smushed little flattened rhombic face. To me, it looks like this is like a cube, right? So what we call this, like if we call it, let's just say Metatron's cube, for instance, or something like that, then all of a sudden we're locking our consciousness into thinking it's just a cube, right? Well, whenever we label anything like that, it all of a sudden just becomes, well, that's then a cube. I'll look at it as a cube. But how about if it's just a flat hexagon? Or how about if it's just a slightly raised one like this? Or how about if it's a rhombic dodecahedron or the chestahedron or the rhombic tricontahedron? So I don't know what to call it anymore, other than it's this seed of life pattern with the 5 life-based circles within it. So, here's the base of it. So I'm putting that in, and the next slide here is I've included those 3 pieces that were around the outside originally. Here they are. Now, these don't look like shape. It looks like a flattened shape, but this is in phi relationship. It's almost like someone took a golden rectangle and just pushed it over, flattened it down, and you could walk on this surface or something. It really messes with your kind of perception of 2D to 3D. But here's the 2D shape, the actual 3D shape in a 2D photo of the shape that kind of starts to create this twisted spin. And when you start constructing this, you're like, what's going to fill in that little gap? Now, mind you, all these points of contact as I'm constructing this are in the drawing. It's in the circles. The circles are dictating where the lines start and stop and end. We're not going to the center of a point or anything like that. And that's why the kind of KNEW geometry, this new geometry, has such a strong connection to the sphere, the kind of maybe feminine principle to kind of dictate where those straight lines are going. And so we are drawing the lines out and connecting them to these points. Now we can continue that as a hexagon all the way across and fill that in, but I'm kind of gonna do it piecemeal here for you one by one. So we've added the first layer. So we've got one of them in. We're going to take 20 of these shapes, remember. Now these little kind of, I don't know, they remind me of like a little candy I used to eat when I was a kid, like Chex, these little flattened, I forget what they're called. They're like little flattened squares, but these are the hexagonal versions of them. And they're going to slot right into this spot here. Check this out. This is so cool to me. They just kind of sandwich in between the faces, and all the faces match up, and they create the central spot to receive the next upward pointing rhombohedron, the acute one, right into the center. We'll get there in a moment. So as I build this, you can see the blue now is integrating with the black ones and creating the central space. You know, I would love to create a little flash book, or maybe even take this slideshow and put in a little book so you could really study these of how if you're into this type of drawing, like how all the lines are beautifully within this. And now remember, we're dealing with just the central circle of the seed of life here. It's just, And with the phi circle, everything is contained within the day one of the creation story. Everything's right there. If you look at the seed of life of being, the 7 circles having to do with the 7 days of creation is a classic sacred geometry kind of metaphor for that, or reality, depending on how well you integrate with this, or how you look at the story. So, we've got right here, it's all contained within the first day here, all going on, but you need all the other circles in order to draw this, right? So we got all the other lines, the blue one, I pull that out. And now that is that little flattened shape that I was showing you. Let's use the bigger one, from the side like that, and it's pretty neat kind of visual perspective to look at some of these things and how they're going to look in the drawing. And here they are in the 3D. Now we're going to keep going. So now we're going to add in those the next diamond rhombic acute form of it. So those are going to kind of go right here along the sides, and we're going to pack those in, and those are going to get in. I put the central one in there as well. So those fit in right around. Now I know it's probably harder to see in the drawing. It's probably easier to kind of visualize it and see it here. I'm just basically illustrating that I went back and forth between building the pieces, doing the drawing, building the piece, do the draw, build the piece, do the draw, etc., like that, just to make sure that really this does contain all the lines that I need to draw it and make it. Because once I can make it, I could take that 2-dimensional template and pull it out and bring it to life with the rhombohedron. This is a 1-for-1 drawing. I basically built my templates for these forms off of this drawing. So the next phase is we are adding in the long rhombic faces, the longer rhombohedron again. I might have missed a slide along here. Yeah, we pack those in on the sides here, the blue ones. We got that. Those were going on. I think I might have jumped one. But so we had to tuck some blue ones in kind of on the back side here. And now we're going to take these long ones once again, and they're going to sit upright right in here. They're going to slot into this spot. And then that will be this slide. Okay. So now we've taken this kind of red, the red color in the middle. That's what this shape is. Now it looks kind of like a elongated box or something like that. Look at this. It looks like a rectangle on its side, a rectangular kind of box. This looks totally flat. This looks flat, like on an angle that way. It's such a mind-altering perception to me to look at these shapes, because I'm like, oh, okay, that looks like a rectangle. But that is actually this long rhombic rhombohedron diamond type shape face, and 3 of them just fit right there. And we're just about at the last slide here, where you actually end it differently than you started. So in the beginning, we started with the kind of 1, and now we add the last 3 of these flattened obtuse rhombohedrons on top to kind of cap it off at the end. You can see here in the drawing. And I kept the dotted lines to kind of track where the underlying ones were. I know it's probably far away in the video, so hopefully these slides here, the actual image of it is kind of showing you how it kind of got all pieced together. And these are all the components that correspond to the build out of this. And I did it one more time just to kind of color coordinate it a little bit better at the end. So all the red ones in this drawing here are all the acute rhombohedrons. This is the long, diamondy, pointy one. And the kind of flattened obtuse one is all the blue ones in the drawing here. Okay, so it's really neat to work with all those forms to totally construct, this rhombic tricontahedron shape, which is like a culminating shape of like all platonic solids are nested within this, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, the cube, the tetrahedrons, the icosahedron. They're all within this. Even the dodecahedron is in here, and many, many more forms. All the truncated forms are in here as well. Golden ratios all through this form. So it's really one of the brilliant forms that contains so much. Now, the fellow who created this, he didn't create this the way I just showed you. He kind of created these long, I don't know, the cone shaped, daggery shaped things that kind of all meet in the center like that. but it is still a very colorful visual way, and you can create cool shapes out of it. But I really much prefer this kind of design that I showed you of this build, how it's all pieced together that way and can be broken apart. And just looking at this kind of as a, I don't know, almost like a kind of MC Escher drawing of like, look at how many different examples of the same shape that we see within this here, right? So here's the blue, we got hexagon, we got this, you know, it looks like a rectangular cube or a cube on its side, like a box on its side here, small flattened box. Here's just like a side view of a flattened shape, it looks like, just, you know, and then here's the red one. So that's what it looks like. That's the acute version. So, you know, 3 different versions or 3 different views of that one. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, like that. So it is very MC Escher-like of how to play with those shapes and look at them from either the flat 2D perspective or 3D shapes, and they could be multiple 3D shapes. And I can understand why this would be related to those 4D or 5D or 6D structures, because when you look at those, they really ask you to warp your mind about what is the square within that shape, what is the cube within that shape. They're not just our perfect little nice little cubes that we usually see with all the same equal edges. So anyway, so we did it. That was all within this drawing, beautifully contained within that seed of life drawing. And not only that, but the Belinsky dodecahedron, which I mentioned early on with this one, the Belinsky dodecahedron, which, you know, I never thought when I started doing sacred geometry, I just thought it was just, heck, you know, everything was in the flower of life pattern. That was all I would ever get into, was just drawing, you know, star tetrahedrons and whatnot, and octahedrons and just whatever was in it. That's what I thought it was. I didn't think that I'd be discovering how to construct the Belinsky dodecahedron. I didn't even know the Belinsky dodecahedron existed till a couple days ago. But there it is, like the geometry just revealed it and showed it. Now, the way you get this line here is if you've got to continue this all the way through. I'm just showing like where it stops. So this Belinsky dodecahedron is a kind of part of the rhombic tricontahedron. It's made up of 2 acute rhombohedron and 2 of these obtuse flattened rhombohedron. So the 2 here kind of tuck in at the backside, and then these kind of sandwich the top and the bottom of it. And once again, like I've had this in my house for for 2 years, at least a year and a half, 2 years now, of just made this and was just looking at it, really didn't know what I was looking at and didn't think that it was like kind of part of sacred geometry. I mean, that's the divide I'm talking about here, is like, I think sacred geometry has to kind of upgrade. It's got to kind of catch up to like the science, or else it's going to kind of become a kind of like almost kind of archaic, just with hexagons and you know, the primarily with the octahedron and the tetrahedron as the primary things that it works with, because you have to incorporate these phi-based circles. That's the only way that I got to this. So it's still quite useful, the older patterns, but with these recent discoveries in science, with the quasi-crystals really discovered in '82 and now finding them in nature. That was the thing, they didn't exist in nature. So these didn't really come into frame of reference till Penrose discovered them in 1996 with the Penrose tiles. So, you know, Plato, Pythagoras, all those guys who were working on this before, yes, they had the perfect icosahedron and the dodecahedron that they worked with. They knew it existed, but their inspiration from it might have actually been from like pyrite, which doesn't produce perfect dodecahedrons. It doesn't have that symmetry. It works off a square. So I got to do this pyritohedron video, maybe as in a follow-up on this one, to kind of show like that's where sacred geometry had led me until this quasi-crystal discovery of these phi-based circles. And the cool thing is that within this, you know, you could still do your star patterns in here, like we're familiar with them. And there's 3 versions of stars, you know, the double stars, upward triangles and downward triangles. And they're based on each of the phi circles, 1, 2, and 3. And that's the layout that you need to construct every single one of those little rhombohedrons within there. So this is like a highly developed, expansive thing that like relates to some of the new scientific discoveries that we're working with within the past 40 years. And this is just one view of it. Like once we get into like the pentagonal view of this and utilize this, we'll be looking at it from this angle. But since this is such a iconicized flower of life design, it's important to see how all this fits into it. Okay, so we can draw this rhombic tricontahedron with it. Now, the cool thing here is I took the picture of this big zoom tool one that I created here of the form. And when I was really close to I took a close shot here, same form, same angle that I'm taking the shot at. And when I took it close, it was like an optical illusion of perception here, by the 3D perception of the 2D camera took it to actually blend together this triangle, which is actually separate than this one below it, but actually superimpose them on top of one another. And you could see that then all of a sudden the pattern looks like the classic star within star within star. It doesn't have this little edge, the star that comes over. So it was kind of neat to see that the old pattern was actually in that from this 2D photograph. But then I backed the camera way up to show that actually there are 3 layers of stars within this, okay, that go all the way through. And I'll show you that on the big screen when I'm done. 3 layers of stars that are created that exactly this image that we see here out of the zoom tools fits exactly over top of this. Now, I wanted to try and take it a little bit of a step further, and this gets a little more chaotic, but I wanted to start putting the rhombic tricontahedrons together. And I know you can do that. And it looks like there's going to be some filler form that's going to kind of pack that together to kind of fill in the space. But I started to overlay that over this new seed of life, this flower of life pattern, really build it out in a much bigger way. This would include like 12 of these forms packed together, kind of like almost like a cube octahedron. And I don't even know if this will work. I have to build a lot of these little models and forms to make it happen. I mean, I could cut out the larger rhombic tricontahedron and put them together, but I'm really wondering, like, what can I do just with these little forms? Like, can I just build out and keep placing these together and create a pattern that will go on infinitely just out of constructing out of the little golden rhombi? Like a quasi-crystal, will there be some aperiodic structure that shows in them? I don't know. Like someone with an awesome 3D printer or computer graphic modeling thing, like I do all this hand drawn, and I can't just pick up an image. Like when I do all these, I can't just like, oh, I'll just drag this over here, I'll reproduce it and turn it 45 degrees. I do every single one of these hand drawn, with the iPad, and draw it in and do all the geometry to make every single one of these shapes. So once it's there, I got to redo, like I got to move it like and redraw it over here. So, I mean, as an integrative process of my own learning, I'm really getting quite a lesson in all that. Because there's something that can get lost when you have the computer do everything for you. And you just say, rotate that 45 degrees, rotate, flip it and turn it this way. When we learn to work with these projective geometries like this and learn how to rotate them ourselves and use geometry to do the discoveries, that's what we want to be teaching our younger people. And it's very enjoying for older people too. But the younger kids, like sacred geometry has a real strong home within their pattern language, because it's going to connect them, like this will connect them to new discoveries in the quasi-crystals. Like who's going to be the frontier person who takes it to the next level? And they started drawing patterns like this when they were 4 or 5 years old, because it's not that hard to draw this. So that's the pattern. I took out a lot of the circles to show what it may look like, with all the rhombic tricontahedrons packed together like that. And you could shade some of these to give it the 3-dimensional depth, and a lot more research I got to do on that. But I guess I want to kind of conclude with this image here to just look at what's going on with the flower of life pattern, and why I think one of my strong components that I'll continue to share about and talk about, because I really think it's that important of a transition for our geometers and people who are getting into sacred geometry to kind of really take a look at, draw it yourself, see what discoveries come up with. But all I know is for myself with drawing this pattern, like how easily I can draw the dodecahedron right at the center of this. And many of my previous videos, I think the one, Sacred Geometry for the Next Millennium or something like that, talks about like the actual techniques of how to draw these within this seed of life pattern. There's 3 different versions, 3 different size phi circles. They're the same ones that Shechtman was talking about in the 10-sided symmetry there. Well, I'm just using those right here. In fact, I could take this drawing right here and just convert it into, you know, the decagon, some of these into the decagon form, you know, so you could work with it in that context as well. So here's the dodecahedron drawn accurately. Here's the icosahedron with that little flared up thing. Now, the cube, the octahedron, tetrahedron. Here's the chestahedron, right? That is drawn within this way. So that's a huge part of how I got to this. And now this is kind of the culminating form. That's the rhombic tricontahedron, which I was talking about, which is essentially encasing all of these together. You can even, you know, figure out a way to tuck in the chestahedron in there, built off of one of the triangles in the bottom, if you'd like. So that's all within this pattern here, right? This is 7 around to 1 here, and many, many more. All the truncations, you know, you can get into the Archimedean solids. You have to find probably where to truncate things. And then, now this is, remember, these large circles here are the same flower of life circles as this. I've just added 2 more layers to it. And once you do the second layer, the middle circle is easy. You just put it right in the middle of the circles around it. And then we have, you know, the basic pattern that's classically everywhere, and it's containing all this root information, but it's kind of lacking a little bit. It's lacking some things, and it's been misrepresented to contain the icosahedron and the dodecahedron in a way that you have to draw it way out here and draw the fruit of life and add a lot more circles. And what you end up doing is drawing the drawing a rhombic, drawing an octahedron, and then, you know, making it into an icosahedron. And the decahedron, you got to hunt around for lines, and they're trying to find that little connecting line, but that's not actually where it is, because it actually has to be a phi proportioned line. So of course, we can do all the truncations and things in here. We can do, the truncated octahedron in this pattern. We can do all that. We can do that all here. Anything that this can do, right? There's a lot of things that this can do over here that this one can't do. And I'm not saying we have to choose or do it. This is a very simple, easy drawing. Let's just be clear on what it is actually capable of doing. And the 3 root foundational forms before we get into the truncations, or even the cube octahedron, which is, of course, another truncation, is it includes the octahedron, the cube, and the tetrahedron. That's primarily the main things. And we could turn that into the rhombic dodecahedron, which is the fusion of the cube and the octahedron. And then that's kind of where I have to draw the line in my discoveries, because I can't include the icosahedron, chestahedron, rhombic tricontahedron, all these other things over here, icosahedron. So in my mind, this is kind of the next step to kind of incorporate, and it's not even that hard to draw. And I'm going to just do an easy video, because all you do is, once you get your compass radius for that inside circle, which just takes 2 extra steps, you're off and running, and you just do all those circles in the same pattern. So, and then you have all these awesome connecting lines to do it. So there's no need to make any choice or one's better than the other. Although it may sound like I'm saying that, remember, it's not better than, it's just an evolution of. It just continues to add and expand. And I have a feeling that it relates to kind of, let's stop the share here. It kind of relates to this kind of expansion with the quasi-crystals. And remember, at first, it was like an atomic bomb explosion. So that doesn't sound too great. Like, great, okay, all right, icosahedron and Dodecahedron, which is part of sacred geometry, is an atomic explosion. Oh gosh, why do we want that? That's not is there anything sacred about that? But it's the energy that was in that. It takes that amount of energy to have a 4.5 billion meteorite that was back at the beginning of our solar system that collided with some of this other object and must have had thousands thermal pressure or something like that, and high intense heat, like 1,000 Kelvin or something, to be able to fuse together to create this aperiodic pattern. So that's part of nature. And before that, crystallography didn't really think we had that. And when you look through any crystallography book, or like the work of Buckminster Fuller, or even like our recent physicists, like Nassim Haramein working with the isotropic vector matrix. It's all within that hexagonal pattern of the crystal structure, the quartz crystal structure. And then all of a sudden you have this quasi-crystal show up, which, yes, is also part of the nature and the natural, it is a natural process, but it just takes certain conditions. How prevalent are these in the universe? How expansive are? How many different types? Well, there's hundreds that are already being formed based on us, and we found a couple examples in natural settings, from other places in our universe, extraterrestrial, outside of our on Earth thing, other than the explosion that created the trinitite. But it is now starting to be part of our awareness and making advances in our scientific understanding and knowledge that is influencing how we're going to build and design and create structures in the future now that these exist. And sacred geometry, in order for it to still continue to be applicable, and not just kind of be like a quasi-science, that actually has some very great relevance to the young minds that are out there, and even probably some findings that are new that can be added to the great minds of the Western scientists or indigenous scientists that are out there, to continue to incorporate this into the pattern language. And it all kind of got started with Penrose back in 1976. So that's the long ride I've been on throughout the week, ever since working with the Chestahedron and how it kind of got me there. It really kind of, as I'm saying, made me understand why that flower of life connection that I've been describing, kind of why it needs to be upgraded in kind of a way. I mean, it doesn't need to, but if we want it to kind of be more expansive and grow with the culture, with the scientific culture, with the spiritual culture, with everything that's associated with it, as evolution continues to grow and our awareness, consciousness continues to expand within big consciousness that we are, well, then it's a great addition to that pattern language. So yeah, please try it out. I'll do a simple video on it, and I'm going to come back with some more videos. Thank you for watching. Until next time, enjoy your weekend or week, and yeah, peace and love.